Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the strategic shortcut to becoming instantly well-informed. Today, we are putting our chips on the table, really diving deep into the real secret of long-term poker success. Now, you might think it's all about, memorizing those probability charts or mastering pot odds. And look, those tactical skills, they're absolutely essential, no doubt. But the source material we analyzed points to something, well, something deeper. The true advantage, it seems, comes from your personality.
That's absolutely right. Poker is such a dynamic, zero-sum environment. It's actually a perfect laboratory for studying high-pressure decision-making and, well, human psychology. If you focus only on the math, you're kind of missing the foundational element for, sustainable profit.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to extract the 6 specific personality traits that consistently give players a strategic edge. And, critically, for you listening, figure out if these traits are fixed, or if they can actually be deliberately developed.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We should start with the intellectual edge, right? Focusing on players who treat the game less like a gamble and more like a complex, maybe even solvable problem. We're talking about the analytical thinkers here.
Exactly, the analytical thinker. This is the strategist who approaches the game, methodically. They really prioritize logical reasoning over any kind of emotional impulse. They seem to enjoy breaking down complex situations into solvable components.
Okay, can you give us a concrete example, like in real time at the table? How does this actually look when they get dealt, say, a marginal hand?
Sure, good question. Let's say they're holding a 7 of spades and an 8 of spades. It's a hand with potential, but pretty low immediate value. They don't just bet based on a feeling or a hunch. No, they calculate the odds of hitting a straight or a flush on the flop, the turn, the river. They assess the pot odds, how much they stand to win versus how much they have to put in. And they calculate the expected value, or EV, of every possible action before they commit any chips.
Wait, hang on. For listeners who might not be deep into poker theory, EV, can you just quickly anchor that term? Expected value, that's basically the long-term average profitability of taking that specific action, right?
Precisely. Yeah, it's the long-term profit calculation for that move. Their reliance on pure data and logic, it significantly reduces their dependence on luck. It minimizes variance wherever they possibly can.
That intellectual rigor. Okay, that leads us directly to the next trait you identified, patience. We all kind of know patience is good, generally. But in poker, you're saying it has to be an active strategy, not just sitting there.
It is entirely active, yeah. Patience in poker is really an active skill. It's focused on maximizing information accrual. That's the key. Patient players resist that urge to jump into every hand, which, let's be honest, is a major downfall for most recreational players who just, get bored.
So if they're folding a lot, what vital work are they doing while they wait? What's the active part?
They're investing that time in observation. Deep observation. They are cataloging opponents' habits. Their betting tells subtle ones, maybe obvious ones, their timings, how long they take, their reactions when they lose a hand. They really understand the game is a marathon, not a sprint. And this mindset ensures they wait for the optimal moment to strike, because they've already sort of purchased through just watching the information they need to execute their strategy effectively when the time comes.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like treating the table like a lab even when you're not in the experiment yourself. Okay, here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. We shift completely from the intellectual side to the psychological edge. And that brings us to emotionally intelligent individuals, EQ.
Yes, emotional intelligence, or EQ. It's arguably one of the most critical factors. And it operates in 2 key kind of opposing ways. First, reading others. High EQ players are often experts at interpreting betting patterns, picking up subtle tells.
Hold on, interpreting tells. Isn't that just basic observation skills?
Yeah.
Or even acting. How does that elevate to emotional intelligence?
It rises because they aren't just looking at, say, a physical twitch or a quick glance at chips. They're interpreting the motivation behind it, the why. So they might see a rapid bet not just as speed, but maybe as overcompensation for a weak hand or nervousness. They're analyzing the psychological state of their opponent, frustration, fear, maybe false confidence, and they adjust their strategy based on that deeper psychological cue. Not just the surface behavior, it's reading the person.
Got it. Okay, and second component you mentioned, that's self-control, controlling their own emotions.
Exactly. And this is the critical defense against what poker players call tilt. Now, tilt isn't just being frustrated or a bit angry. It's the point of strategic leakage. where the player stops calculating EV, stops thinking logically, and starts making emotional, often aggressive reactionary bets. The emotionally intelligent player maintains that state of rational calm even when taking significant losses. They can recognize the onset of tilt in themselves and consciously step back mentally. They refuse to allow emotion to just turn their strategy into simple gambling.
Wow. That sounds like an essential trait, not just for poker, but maybe for surviving quarterly business reviews too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on to another trait that often gets misunderstood. The calculated risk taker. People often picture these reckless gamblers when they think of poker success, don't they?
That's the common image, yeah, but it's the key distinction. Reckless gambling is just a fast track to going broke. Calculated risk-taking, however, is rewarded, especially when it's strategic. Poker is fundamentally an aggressive game, but only if that aggression is, mathematically and psychologically justified.
So this isn't really gambling in the pure sense. It's more like, I don't know, an entrepreneur betting on market projections. Is that a fair comparison for the listener?
That is an excellent comparison, actually. Yeah. They're making a high-stakes decision, but it's based on probabilistic modeling, on the data they have. Whether it's a well-timed bluff or maybe a large semi-bluff, these players evaluate the probabilities, they factor in opponent tendencies, what they've observed, and they analyze the potential outcomes before making that bold move. It's this balance of courage and caution that really defines a professional approach.
Okay, speaking of strategic aggression, that only works if you're not predictable, right? Which I guess leads us directly to the operational requirement of adaptability.
Right.
Because no two poker games are ever alike, the table dynamics are constantly shifting.
Absolutely. Rigidity is a killer at the poker table. Predictability is just inherently exploitable by good players. Adaptable players thrive precisely because they are observant and they're willing to change course mid-game. They don't just marry a single strategy and stick to it no matter what.
Can you illustrate that flexibility? Like, what does a strategic shift actually look like in practice?
Sure. A player might start a session playing very aggressively, loose aggressive maybe, trying to establish dominance, build a certain table image, make people afraid of them, but then if they notice the rest of the table has adjusted, maybe they're waiting to trap them. They'll pivot instantly to a tight, conservative, even passive style sometimes. They use their newly established aggressive reputation against the table. That willingness to shift gears makes them both resilient and highly unpredictable. It forces opponents to constantly guess their true intentions and hand strength.
Right, keeping them off balance. And finally, rounding out our list of these 6 key traits, we have the confident players, the ones who trust their decisions under fire.
Confidence is crucial, yes, for decisive execution. It allows players to take those calculated risks without second-guessing or hesitation. And crucially, it helps them maintain their composure during the inevitable swings of variance, the unavoidable runs of short-term bad luck that happen to everyone.
But wait, if they're so analytical, like we discussed earlier, how does confidence separate them from just being good at math? If the math says do X, why do they need confidence on top of that?
That's a great point. It's because variance can be absolutely brutal, emotionally. Confidence, in this specific context, is the ability to execute mathematically correct decisions even when the short-term results are screaming that you're wrong. When you're losing pot after pot despite playing well, it allows them to stick to the proven, long-term, profitable strategy when every instinct and every losing hand is telling them to doubt themselves, to change things up emotionally.
Okay. So the warning here must be about overconfidence then, that tipping point where it becomes arrogance.
Absolutely. That's the danger zone. Confidence must always be balanced with humility and with continuous objective review of your own play. Overconfidence leads to believing your gut or your feel overrides the math, and that results in unnecessary risks, poor judgment, and ultimately losing money. Measured earned confidence, confidence based on sound strategy and execution, supports consistent play.
Okay, so we have the 6 traits that seem to lead to long-term success. Analytical, patient, emotionally intelligent, calculated risk-taker, adaptable, and confident. That really paints a picture of the ultimate poker-friendly personality profile. So what does this all mean for someone listening right now who might realize, I'm perhaps pretty impulsive, or I'm not very patient? Can these traits actually be learned, or are you just stuck with what you've got?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, based on what we see, is a resounding yes. They can be learned. While sure, some traits might be naturally stronger in certain people, the majority of these behavioral aspects, things like patience, emotional control, adaptability, even confidence, they can be significantly improved. But it takes consistent practice, deliberate reflection, and real self-awareness. It's work.
So it's essentially like training your mind to adopt a strategic protocol, almost like mental conditioning.
Yeah.
What are the first actionable steps then for a listener who knows they struggle with, let's say, impulse control at the table or maybe even in life?
Okay, first, they absolutely have to identify their natural strengths, but also honestly address the weaknesses directly. For impulse control specifically, we need to move beyond just saying, be less impulsive. That doesn't work. We suggest implementing a, let's call it decision buffer protocol. Before making any critical decision, whether it's betting big in poker or maybe reacting to an upsetting email at work, you institute a mandatory pause, maybe just 5 seconds, an internal timeout.
A forced pause, like hitting a mental reset button.
Exactly. This short pause forces a quick reevaluation, maybe just enough time to consider the EV or the long-term consequence before execution. They also need to consciously monitor their emotional reactions during a rough patch, like a losing streak.
Yeah.
Notice the feelings. And then, this is key, analyze the outcomes of those plays objectively after the session or after the situation, away from the heat of the moment. This consistent, reflective practice builds self-assurance over time. It leads to confidence that is earned through proven discipline, not just assumed arrogance.
This has been a really concentrated deep dive into the mechanics of success at the table and maybe beyond. So just to recap quickly for everyone, the 6 personality traits driving long-term poker success are being analytical, patient, emotionally intelligent, a calculated risk taker, adaptable, and confident. These traits seem to allow players to manage their own game, their emotions, and read opponents effectively.
And if we just connect this back to the bigger picture for a second, remember that while personality definitely provides that fundamental strategic edge, it absolutely must be combined with continuous learning knowledge of the game, strategy, practice, and discipline, day in, day out. Personality without knowledge is really just guesswork, isn't it? And knowledge without the discipline to apply it, well, that's maybe just a guess made slightly faster. You need both.
That's excellent context, thank you. And that brings us, as always, to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. If you were to objectively review your own hand history from this past week, maybe think about a stressful meeting or a tough personal negotiation you had. Where did impulse override calculated thinking for you? And looking at the traits we discussed today, what single personality trait, maybe the intense focus on information accrual that comes with patience, or implementing that decision buffer protocol for emotional control, or perhaps the capacity to execute the correct math, even during bad luck, which is confidence, which one trait derived from this deep dive would give you the most significant immediate strategic advantage in your daily life. Something to ponder until our next deep dive.